All right, once again, welcome. This is How to Succeed at Trade Shows and Events, presented by David Mattson, and I'm Mike Montague, your Director of Content Marketing. Welcome, David. He is President and CEO of Sandler Training, and we have a lot of good stuff going on today. Dave, you want to start? Why should people be interested in trade shows and events these days?
Well, Mike, thanks for having me, and welcome everybody. Yeah, I mean, trade shows and events is just a great opportunity for you to see an awful lot of people in a short amount of time. I mean, if you think about, and I've done many trade shows, and whether it's 200 people or 2,000 people walking by my booth, or if I'm at an event like a chamber and they're still walking by, how long would it have taken me to reach out and potentially talk to those many net new prospects? And so I think if you do it properly, it really can take a month or two, or maybe even 6 months of your prospecting activities into one shot if you were going to do it properly. So I think it's a numbers thing.
Yeah, I think that's great. And there's all kinds of different events these days too. So it might not be that gigantic Las Vegas trade show that you used to do several years ago, but a lot of like smaller micro events have come up. Or I know in my background, as we get to know us a little bit here, I was on the radio for 6 years, and I was the prize guy. I was Romeo, not because I was cool or anything. My last name's Montague. There you can see on the screen. And Romeo got to broadcast live from concerts and car dealerships and all kinds of crazy things that were really event-based marketing several times a day, and had to catch people at these booths or walking by and get them to fill out a lead form for us and enter to win that iPad or whatever we happen to be giving away to the next thing. And there's interesting dynamics in all of these different events that happen. And I know you've done a ton over your career as well, David. So what are some of the events that you've done, and which ones were most successful maybe?
Well, I mean, I've done a ton of events. So, I mean, certainly trade shows. We've done events where it's not a full-blown trade show, but you have the opportunity to meet people that are participating in another type of conference, and so you're out in the hallway type thing. You know, and there's a ton of hybrids. I know at Sandler, for many years, and it's still true, our #1 event that we do to find net new relationships are executive briefings, where they come to our center, Mike, and you almost do an edu-sell where you spend 2 hours or 3 hours, you give them rock'em sock'em content, things that they would have never heard otherwise, give them plenty of things that they would say, ah, that's very interesting. I would not have known that. I would not have done that. And then turn it into a conversation to see if there's a relationship. So, I mean, I think in my world over the last 30 years, I've done a ton of them. And I'll go back to something that I did a trade show for David Sandler in the early 90s. So I'm doing a flashback. And and there was probably 4,000 people at this trade show. And, I was going there waiting. I was the guy that was going to run the booth for him. And he showed up because it was in Philadelphia, so it was only a couple-hour drive. And I remember him telling, hey, listen, we got a problem with the trade show booth. I stopped by a signs company, and I hadn't produced this, which was a banner, Mike, that said, our trade show booth got lost. Or I think it actually said, booth got lost, ask questions. And so he put that across the trade show. There was nothing there. I mean, it was empty, and I was sitting next to people that had spent $20,000, $30,000 on their booth. And all of a sudden, I popped up a tent, let's say, in this multi-million-dollar neighborhood, and here I am sitting in a tent. And he said, don't worry about it. Now, I didn't know about it ahead of time, so I didn't hyperventilate. I didn't do any of those things. I'm like, oh, my gosh, okay. And so people would walk by, they'd look at it, they'd laugh, and they remember some of their own nightmares. And then it said, well, what do you do? And then it started, and I actually had more conversations and more business from that show than I did when I showed up with the $25,000 booth. And believe it or not, at the end, Sandler said, well, we learned something interesting today. I said, yeah, what was that? He said, actually, we had the booth, but the booth's a distraction, and it's a crutch. Today we learned how to sell. I was like, oh, here we go. And if he had told me that ahead of time, I would have gone out to the parking lot, well, where's his car, gotten the darn booth out of there, because it was a crutch, But just by simply saying the booth got lost, ask questions, it forced us to have a conversation. It forced me to engage people. And I'm not saying I would or wouldn't have done that otherwise, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have had the same results. So that's one that sticks out in my mind to this day.
Yeah, and I think it's an awesome example to start with here because I noticed the same thing when I was doing events and stuff. Like when I walked away from the booth to go to the bathroom or get a beverage or something, then the booth filled up. And then when I went in the booth, everybody scattered away like I was intimidating. And it was almost counterintuitive. And sometimes if I stepped out in front of the booth and got out in the aisle, more people would talk to me. But if I was behind the table, they wouldn't. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics at play at events, and I love some of those counterintuitive ideas that Sandler was so awesome at. But people might not actually know who Sandler is. We have hundreds of people on the webinar today. Should we take a second and tell them what we're all about?
Sure, go ahead.
So, in short, Sandler Training is the world's largest sales training company with over 250 locations worldwide. We train thousands, tens of thousands of people in tons of different sessions around the world. Our primary focus started in sales. From there, we've grown out to sales management, leadership, and customer service training. And we have awesome local trainers close to you. So if you need to find one of those, just go to sandler.com and you'll find a local training center around the corner. Or of course, they can come to you and learn more if you want to get more in-depth about the sales training, communication, and success principles that we teach. Anything else you want to add there, Dave?
No, I think it boils down to, look, we're in the reinforcement business, and I think if I had to separate it from anything that you've read or seen, one is the fact that our trainers, bar none, are the best in the industry, and they live and breathe this stuff every single day. And I love people going to a boot camp for the very first time who don't want to be there. And, and we have to earn their respect by about 9:30, or they're going to find a way to get out of there by lunch. And when somebody will say to any one of the Sandler people, hey, that's a great idea, how to get past the gatekeeper. Could you show us how you do that? Which is a trick, right? That's called stump the trainer. And our people will say, sure, why don't we just put a call on live speaker? And they show them, or they put them in role play. Why don't you play the gatekeeper, sir, and I'll play you. You don't know my business. It's okay. And they'll kick right into a role play. I've witnessed this 1,000 times at different centers across the world, and people are in shock that our people can go right into role play, right into this is how you do it, because they eat, breathe this stuff. And so I think that's magical. And the other thing is just the success triangle, which we'll talk about in a couple seconds here. So, I mean, I think those are the big differentiators out there in the marketplace.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And our last piece of promo here before we dive into the content and get started is that we are doing this as a preview to our annual Sales and Leadership Summit. It's in Orlando, Florida, March 9th and 10th, so it is right around the corner. We wanted to make sure that everybody coming to the event makes the most out of this opportunity to network, get introductions, maybe referrals, and most importantly, learn from our top Sandler trainers from around the world that are going to be there in 2 days of intensive, just awesome world-class training from the stage, as well as 3 different breakout tracks for enterprise selling, sales, or leadership. And you also get to network with like 1,000 other like-minded professionals that are here, and just the top winners from all of our sales training companies around the world attend this as a little bit of a client summit too, and we wanted to make sure you got invited. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can join us at sandler.com/Sandler Summit, and we will see you in Orlando. Now, the next thing we have to do before we really get started and talk about trade shows is talk about the personal growth process. And you'll see it on the screen here that a lot of times we want to just be good at event marketing, and hearing Dave and I talk about it for an hour today on a webinar is not really going to make you any better at trade show marketing. What we can do is we can make you aware of some of the things that you hadn't thought of before, like maybe not bringing a booth or not investing in the booth, but investing in the conversations when you get ready. And then we can give you a little bit of knowledge here in an hour on how to do some of these techniques and things that we'll be talking about. What we can't do in the middle there is application. We can't have you go out to an event during this hour and try any of these things that we're talking about. So that's where it's up to you, is the application right in the middle. And then if you apply it a few times, you'll have ownership of these techniques, and eventually you can become a trade show or an event master but it's the application that transforms this knowledge into skill. So we want you to take what you hear today and get out there, get to a chamber event, get an expo, the home shows that come through your neighborhood or anything else. Get out there and try some of these techniques that we talk about. So, Dave, as we get started here on our first tip, we have a question for everybody. How much time do you spend preparing for a business development event? Text your answer code to 22333, or just text your answer code or tweet it to @poll, and we'll see some responses jump out here and we'll get everybody else's. Text your answer code over on the left to 22333, and we'll see how this comes up. How much time do you spend preparing for a business development event? All right, the numbers are starting to move here.
Where I'm eating? This is outside where I'm eating now, Mike, in my plane schedule. This is the actual, what are we doing there?
Yeah, exactly. So a meeting ahead of time, or prep and research on who you're going to meet, things that you might be doing outside of the, oh, hey, we got a 15-minute drive to this thing. What should we do when we get there?
Mm-hmm. We call that pre-call planning, Mike.
Yes, exactly.
Sarcasm. So a lot of people spend a day or more.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people are investing in these events, which is awesome, and you want to make the most of them. If you're spending prep time, you're shipping a booth somewhere, you're traveling or sending a group of teams to an event, you want to make sure that you get a return on investment. So it looks like these numbers are staying fairly regular now, so we can move on to the next one. But any thoughts on this, Dave? How long should we spend preparing for an event?
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be a little different depending on how often you do these and how many players are involved. But certainly in my mind, you know, proper planning prevents poor performance, right? So I think if we look at today's event, we're going to look at it in three different buckets. We're going to look at it as a pre-event planning, what's going to happen during the event itself, and then all the stuff that happens after the fact. But even before that, Mike, maybe we can set the stage, because you know, whether you're doing one trade show a year, one a month, or you're doing events, you or your company sees value in them. But you said something right there, which is, it's true. It costs an awful lot of money. And I think if you were to actually put the dollars into it, it's going to be anywhere from, you know, 10 to 25 plus for you to actually run an effective trade show, and it's probably more depending on what we're out there. I mean, I've been to trade shows where they're spending $100,000 plus just getting space in a booth, so we can spend an awful lot of time in there. So today, in these three big buckets, you know, we're going to be talking about behavior, attitude, and technique, and I think that's what we call the success triangle. You're going to need all three of those, and whatever we do, we're going to certainly have to have the right behaviors, certainly have the right mindset, and the right technique. So today, I think we're really going to be spending a lot of time on behaviors and techniques. But I don't want to downplay or forget attitude or mindset, because I think it's equally as important. And mindset, belief in whether trade shows and events are productive or not, kind of set the stage on how you're going to attack this. Because I remember I had two different mindsets in my career. One was pre-Sandler, one was post-Sandler. And, you know, pre-Sandler, I would complain that I didn't want to go to this thing. It was going to be a waste of 2 days of my time, and I was going to miss all of the opportunities that I had to prospect. And I would actually blame the trade show for the reason why I wasn't going to hit quota. I mean, that was a 2-day. I was blaming those 2 days because, you know, that was going to turn the tide of my quarter or my month. And I would remember going out to get these cushions, right, Dr. Scholl's cushion stuff for my feet, because, oh my gosh, I was going to be tired standing for 2 days, and it already started. My mind was polluted, my body started to hurt. I hadn't even left my home yet, and it was just a nightmare. But when I learned, hey, first of all, you know, and again, you could talk yourself into a great call, or you can talk yourself out of a great call, you know, and that's true on talking yourself into a great day or out of a great day. But when I realized what trade shows were and could be, my mindset shifted. And I looked forward to events, and I looked forward to trade shows because I said, hey, listen, I'm making outbound calls, and I would do a bunch of stuff, but quite frankly, I didn't wake up every day and say, oh my gosh, today is such a great day outside. What a great day for cold calling. This is going to be wonderful. I might as well just bang my head against a cement wall. And that's really because you're setting yourself up to get rejected more than not. So, I didn't wake up on a daily basis saying, I got to go find 500 net new prospects, but that's really what a trade show did. And once I got my head around that it's a productive way for me to meet a prospect or an opportunity, and I just don't know who they are yet, so I'm going to have to treat every single one equally as well, because the other thing that I found is that I would prejudge people as they walked towards the booth, and I was an expert at reading people's intention. Now, I never actually validated that because it would mess me up. I would be wrong 100% of the time. But when I had a bad attitude, I can tell you I would size them up based on how fast they walked, how many tchotchkes they gotten from other booths, they can't be serious, or what they were wearing, or all these things, and saying, no way is that a prospect. Just absolutely no way. I'm not even going to waste my energy on that person. And it doesn't take too many times to watch that same person talking to a competitor in a booth, and they're exchanging cards to realize, well, who is the big dummy, right? And it went from an art form to a science for me. And that was a big shift. An art form was, I was doing my thing, jockeying around, and then when I turned it into a science and I would start fine-tuning what my approach was and fine-tuning what I was going to do ahead of time, and I was analyzing and managing the process, then it really became productive. So if I look at the pre-event planning, there's three big things there. One is to have a goal for the event. Two is to have a plan to connect with prospects. And three is to have a game plan for your team. All this is ahead of time. Now, today, a lot of people spend it 1 day plus, which is fantastic, and it's unusual. And if we were outside of Sandler clients, you would find that as a much lower number. Most people would spend anywhere from 4 hours or below getting ready for an event. They do spend more time on where are we meeting, where are we eating, where are we staying? Do I get points for my hotel and all that other garbage?
Did I get the pool view or the
yeah, of course.
View?
But so to me, if I'm on this, I believe this is probably one of the most important parts of an event is all the stuff that happens ahead of time. So if you're not spending the appropriate amount of time, and and I made that joke about pre-call planning, but really 50% of a sales call, so if I was on a 1 hour sales call, I should be spending at least 50% of that time, 30 minutes in a pre-call planner. And we can joke whether people do that on the way over to the airport or not, but the fact of the matter is the more you plan for an event, whether it's a sales call or today is a trade show, that you're going to be a lot better off, and you won't have those aha moments where you say, oh, I wish I had thought that through, I wish I knew that, I would have brought this instead. I think those things have to come to a screeching halt, and that's what I'm going to call the art form. The science is the other thing. So how do we have some goals? Let's talk about that. Well, first of all, many people don't have a goal for the event as far as how many cards, how many conversations am I going to have, how many face-to-face meetings am I going to have, how many clear futures am I going to have, how many appointments did I set. And I think if you start to have those goals, then it's much easier to create the game plan, because we know this about goal setting. If you don't have a goal, then anything that you do at that event is a win. And so if you just showed up and you remained healthy, that's a win. If you showed up and talked to one person after 2 days, that's a win. If you showed up and talked all your fellow workers into running the booth so you could go do your emails, that's a win. But if you were to say to yourself, it's my $25,000 that I'm spending on this trade show, what is worth that? And or what's worth 2 days of my most precious commodity called time as an individual producer? What is a good goal? And I would write those down for yourself, because you're going to have to check that out with the rest of your team. But things are stuff like, again, how many conversations am I going to have? And a real conversation, not how's the weather, none of that, but really how am I, how many conversations where we had something relevant to talk about? How many face-to-face meetings did I have during the event? And you can have those at breakfast, you can have those at lunch, you can have those in the evening time. To me, when I used to show up at a trade show, I would have blocks of time in a little, back then it was a calendar, but we would print it out, and I would set those up right next to me. And when I talked to somebody that looked like it was a viable conversation, then I would suggest that we met for coffee, or we met for lunch, or we met for this, and I would try to set up these one-on-one meetings throughout the trade show. And so that was a big thing, because what you're going to hear in a couple minutes is the trade show is not for selling. The trade show is for qualification. And the other thing about the trade show is it's time management. You can spend an hour with one person at a booth, but that just means that 67 other people walked by. So you have to use your time effectively. So my goal was to have a conversation, to quickly qualify, and have a goal for you to say, hey, let's get a cup of coffee before the event is over. And that's I think, really important once you start to identify your goals. The other goals are things that we did before we got to the event, such as how many people are we going to send invitations to? How many guests are we going to invite? What's my meetings? How many meetings am I going to have? What's my revenue goal? I mean, it really, once you start doing a P&L by trade show, and so you close it up. If you're on a 6-week selling cycle, then you close that P&L up after 6 or 8 weeks. You can tell whether you lost money or you didn't lose money. And ultimately in sales, that's how we keep score. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get somebody that pops in 6 to 8 months later. Of course, that'll happen. But I think the key here is my goals of what my activity will be prior to the event, and what's my goals for the event itself. And I would even have a goal to make sure that I didn't miss my cookbook. And what that means, Mike, is that when I'm on the, I'm on the floor for 2 days, and I'm in the moment. Like, in the moment isn't standing in the booth physically checking my email on my iPhone. You might as well sit home and do that. You're wasted. That's a wasted body. So if you're going to focus on what's going on when people are actually out of the events and walking around, then get it done. But I also had a goal which said I had a cookbook, which is a behavioral plan, that if I was in my territory selling, I would have to do X amount of calls, X amount of LinkedIn referrals, X amount of this. And I would have to get that done anyways. And that's the beautiful thing about the cookbook. So I would make sure that within that 24-hour period of time, I got my normal job done. And the trade show was not an excuse to shuffle off my behavioral plan. It was just an added work versus replacing my work. And so all my outbound customer contacts and all the stuff that I would be doing anyways, I still had to find a way to do it. And that made me really, really effective, because there are some peaks and valleys within trade shows. There's some up times and down times. And so that's important. The other thing that I had a goal for was to position myself at the right spot in that trade show. And what I mean by that is everyone kind of waits for the event company to tell you where you're located. I would always ask for, can I see the map of where everyone is? Where are people entering? Where are people going from? And there's a natural migration of how people walk. And so do you want to be in the first? Do you want to be towards the end? Do you want to be towards where the coffee is? Do you want to be towards where the ice cream is, because it's a natural draw? And these are all the things that you should be paying attention to ahead of time, but mostly on your personal goals of what you want to get out of that event, because then it's easy to say that's a win or that's a loss. So that's the first one.
Yeah, and we've opened our next poll here is, what's your attitude the day of the event? And Dave talked about attitude there. I think exactly what you said is huge, because I saw some of these events as my way to make quota, and I love what you said about the behavioral plan too, that when I was doing my most event marketing, there was a team of 3 of us, and our goal was 10,000 names a week from live events. And what's interesting is exactly like you said about the cookbook. If we didn't have a big concert or a big event to go to, there wasn't a home show or a home expo, then we had to make one up. We would take the vans out in 3 different directions, pick a spot on a corner that looked like a busy intersection, and set up our own event. Or like you said, if you're in more like B2B sales, maybe you set up your own executive briefing. So you can set up these events to make your cookbook no matter what. And we have a couple of other quick questions here for you, Dave. What would be the biggest thing to focus on for a first-time home expo participant? This is from Mike.
What's the first thing to focus in on? Well, I think if we talk about, let's do the second one, which is how to plan and connect with prospects. I'm still under pre-event planning. One, and I think the other thing that you have to figure out is how to contact people ahead of time. Because to me, a trade show is where I have net unknown people walking through the door. But that doesn't mean that your job is done. See, if you have a plan to connect with prospects, Mike, I think it's also our job to reach out to those in the general area and say, I'm going to be at the show. Why don't you come see me? Why don't we set a time to meet? So when I would fly into wherever, I would say, hey, I'm going to be there. And I would make, because I had a goal of me setting appointments with non-trade show participants. And so I would meet people when I was in the city, or I would go through and drip the list of participants, because they always give you the list. So I think there's a couple things here. One is go through the pre and have a plan to prospect, which is have a plan to contact them. How are you going to connect? Well, you can connect with all the people that you want to do business with. They give you that mailing list normally. I'd start looking through it. I'd start connecting on LinkedIn. But here's the magical thing that has made events far more productive, which is to drip content. If you drip content, 5 to 8 pieces of content through LinkedIn before you start, during the event, and shortly thereafter, your credibility goes through the roof. LinkedIn has study after study that if you drip 5 to 8 pieces of content on a prospect, that you have a substantially higher closing rate than if you did not. Now, that's a good piece of information if I'm in a dogfight with a competitor, but when I saw that and I started weaving in a drip campaign into our event stuff, the results are dramatic, because now I'm dripping before you got there on things about Sandler, things about, you know, the pains that we solve, those types of things. And it was a big, big win, because at that point, now when they saw us, I've already kind of laid the groundwork about what they should be thinking about, some of their issues. I've established credibility. It's worked. Now you've got to plan out your 5 to 8 your drips. You just can't say, hey, send them anything. You know, you want to drip them statistically. What's going to hit most of them right square face to face with that? That is a pain. This is, I understand your business. Here's the types of things that we do and we solve. And I think the other thing is, before an event, you do have to get your team on the same page. And I've witnessed it so many times when it didn't happen, but just little things like, hey, when are we setting up? You know, when is your time on the floor? You know, what are we going to do? I have found that when, and I'll weave this in, some of my more successful events is when I had a presentation in another room. Now, I would either do it behind the trade show, which was always a bit disruptive, but we would say from 4 to 6 tonight, we're doing a 2-hour presentation on the top 10 things that you should know before you do X. And there's a couple things here, Mike. One, people love numbers. Top 10 things, top 5 things, top 3 things. That catches people's attention. And second, everybody looks like a prospect when they walk by. But when I said, hey, look, we've got a small intimate group upstairs. We're inviting 25 people. They're going to sit through a 90-minute interactive top 10 reasons why, you know, salespeople fail, blah, 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 because I would use my industry. And people would self-select. It would be very interesting who showed up. And the people that I thought would show up just because they sounded interested didn't necessarily always show up. It's the other ones that didn't say much that showed up and ended up buying. It was a great self-selection technique, but it also allowed us to blow away the competition by establishing credibility at the show. And when they came that evening to this 2-hour, 90-minute session, so what did I have to do? I had to rent a room at a hotel. Who cares? I'm already in it for 25 grand, so it's not that big of a deal. And then I would set up either a breakfast or have dinner with somebody who really raised their hand to say, I'm a prospect. Now, obviously they didn't say it in those terms, but that was there. Now, I think the other thing that I would do to answer this person's question directly is if we kind of switch over, as you did, to event execution, here's the thing that pops up. To me, I think the first thing you have to do is engage people in a conversation. I mean, I'm introverted by nature. My behavioral profile is introverted. I don't want to go to trade shows. It's not my thing. I don't want to talk to strangers. It's not my thing. So I got to gear myself up. And, you know, engaging total strangers in conversation in a 30-second walk by is difficult, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just difficult. Simple tricks. Certainly, the faster you have eye contact with these people, the better off you're going to be, because even if they're coming from another booth and you have eye contact, people tend to reciprocate. They tend to give you a smile. If you have an opening line of whatever it is, hey, enjoying the program, or hey, how are you, whatever you're going to do, without hawking, because, you know, when you walked away from the booth in your earlier example, I mean, I promise you, prospects heard Jaws music. Here's the guy. Here's Romeo. You know, which, by the way, is an interesting story. So here's Romeo, and then they hear Jaws music, and when you walk away, it's less threatening. So instead of saying, "Hey, I've got the greatest," you know, that's threatening. That's a little slick. And so if you just kind of start them off with something easy, but here's what I would do to engage people, is to quickly say, hey, look, there's thousands of people here. We're not for everybody. Just real quick, these are the types of things that we do and the types of companies we work with, and give them your 30-second commercial. And for those that are not Sandler clients, 30-second commercial is not how wonderful your company is. In 1927, we did this. No one cares. What your 30-second commercial is the 2 or 3 top problems that you solve, right? And then number 2, the types of organizations that you work with. And even the types of people. So we work with companies like yours who may be experiencing, and kind of paint the picture. And if you would do a great 30-second commercial, which is focused on customer issues, customer pains, not how wonderful your company is, you're going to hook people. Because here's some subtle moves. Hey, we're not for everybody. They already know that. So you've already said the truth. And then you say, well, let me just give you a 5-second overview. We work with organizations who are struggling in the following area. Boom. And then you throw out the statistically the highest, the most complained about thing that you hear from a prospect in order for you to say, wow, that's a prospect for me. What are the top 3 things that they would complain about? You've been on plenty of sales calls. Just translate what happens on a sales call into your 30-second commercial and say it, because what you want them to do is to stop. You want them to say, well, wait a minute, I've got that issue. Or, hey, that's this. And you can always end by saying, is that worth maybe a 2-minute quick conversation before you head to the next booth? And I always let the prospects feel in control, because when you keep giving them an option to leave, they don't leave. When you don't give them an option to leave, they're always looking for the back door. And it's a great way to engage people. So 30-second commercial, is that worth just a 1 to 2 minute quick conversation? If they say no, it's okay. That's what this is for. If they say, well, I'm not sure, or hey, yeah, then now you have started that conversation. So that was one of the greatest things that I took from the Sandler prospecting course and put it into that. And when I said it went from an art form to a science, now you're getting down to a science. That 30-second commercial is a great, it stops them dead in their tracks, because it's counterintuitive to what they've heard from every other person in that show. So that's a big one.
I had a quick question for you real quick. One of the questions from Don here in Kansas City said, what about those first 10 seconds? And I know you hit it really fast there, but I wanted to remind for everybody, is, eye contact, and then you start with a question, right? Do you have any favorite pattern interrupts or ways to start conversations at a networking or event marketing event?
I always do. Hey, you enjoying yourself? Or hey, what do you do? I always like, what's your favorite program? If I'm in a trade show, I say, hey, I know it's a long 2 days. Have you seen anything that excited you thus far? As far as the programs are concerned. See, it's not me yet. So if I said, hey, anything in this booth that you saw was awesome, that's too threatening. So I always start off with, are you enjoying yourself? Did anything pop out in the event that excited you? I do those types of things. If they look and they kind of do that dry smile, I laugh and say, hey, I understand that. To think about how I feel, right? And so they start laughing because, they're uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable. So I kind of do that part. And then I say, look, I'm not gonna hawk you. I'm sure you've been hawked out at this point. Let me give you the top 3 reasons why people want to talk to us for a couple seconds. And then I whip into my 30-second commercial. So that's how I'll end up doing it. And some people don't stop, Mike. They don't stop, and it's okay. You're not going to stop everybody.
And we had the same thing on the reverse side of that. I know a great way to work a trade show is to not have a booth and just go mix it up with all of the other people at the booth. In that case, do you just say, hey, what's going on, or tell me more about what you guys are doing here, and start conversations that way if you're just mixing it up as a participant?
Oh, you're walking up to them, you're trying to sell? Yeah, I would always say, you always start by, hey, how's the trade show going for you? Hey, we tried to get in, we were a little too late. I think you're going to have to do some transition because otherwise people like me would say, well, wait a minute, why did I pay $25,000? You're just hawking all these people. I don't like that. So you're going to have to soften that up a little bit, right? But I did as much business walking around a show than I was in shows. But if you go, again, with a purpose and with taking a scientific approach, I think that's a win. But I think the bigger thing that you got to pay attention to is you've got to be aware of your environment. And one of the greatest things Sandler taught me was don't sell at a trade show, just qualify. And I'd say, well, what are you talking about? Aren't we going there to sell? Aren't we doing this? He said, David, look around. First of all, no one's going to give you, how long does that sales call take? I said, okay, it takes about 45 minutes. He said, who's giving you 45 minutes? And more importantly, let's just count to 50. How many people walked by? 15. Okay, so that's in like what, 50 seconds? What would walk by in 40 minutes? So your job is to just have really quick conversations. And that's why the 30-second commercial is important. Because if you can take the top 3 pain indicators, the top 3 symptoms, the top 3 complaints that your prospects will continually complain about and say, these are the types of things that I deal with, then your job is to quickly learn a little bit about their business and say, hey, listen, these are the top 3 things that we find. Are these any of those issues for you? And let them start talking. You want them to do most of the talking because when they start telling you the story, they're going to start telling you whether they're a prospect for you. So under the conversations is for qualifying, not selling, I'm looking for one basic thing there. Number 1 is, do you have pain? I mean, why are you there? Are you there to get my free ruler? Or are you there because you have problems that you think sales training is going to fix it? And then what's the impact of those top 1 or 2 problems? You're not going to be an investigator and get them down into the weeds. People don't want to be brought into the weeds. But if I say to you, what's the biggest challenge your salespeople are facing that are holding them back from being as successful as you think they should be? Well, they're not qualifying enough. Okay, I hear that all the time. Does it mean is that a big deal? Is that a $5 problem, $50 million problem? I mean, is that a big one? Well, yeah, that costs us X. Well, okay, I'm not sure there's a fit. Here's the types of people we work with. Is that worth a 2-minute conversation where we're not feeling the pressure of you've got to be in a program in about 6 minutes and we got to do this? And I cut it short. And here's why I cut it short. Because when they say, well, give me the pitch, because I've heard that a million times. Give me the pitch. Well, if you can't do your pitch justice, and the more you try to get it down into a succinct way, what they say is, well, that sounds interesting. Do you have a brochure that I can pick up? If you don't tell them, they still want to know. You say, I'd love to tell you. It's going to take me about 15 minutes. Really, it's like 2 hours, but I can get it down to 15 minutes. Can I meet you for a cup of coffee? What are you doing after the next program? I'll meet you right at the end of that doorway. And so again, people will start to self-select. But the other thing that I think you have to really think about is the back of the card thing. And if you don't mind, I'm going to share something that I learned, and it was great as I watched Sandler himself do it, which is I use their business cards. So most people at an event are going to try to capture business cards, right? I mean, that's really the goal. And some people, that is their goal. How many business cards can we get in the fishbowl to do the free drawing? Okay, well, that's a yawner, but here's what you can do. And we would have one too. But I would always take the business card. You couldn't put it in. I'd take it, and then I would flip it over. So now I got your business card. I flip it over, and on your business card, I draw 1, 2, and 3. And here are the 3 things I'm going to ask you. I say, hey, listen, just so I can put a name to the face after we're done, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to X? Now, you insert it for you. What's your biggest challenge when it comes to maybe your sales force isn't as productive as you'd like it to be? And they would say, I'll use the same example, qualifying. Okay, is that a big problem? I mean, is that like a 50,000, 5,000, 2,000? What? If you had to guess, because how many salespeople do you have again? And of course, they didn't tell me. Well, they have 100. Okay, so if you had to put a number on that, what would it be? Oh, it's this. Okay. On a 0 to 10, last question, because I know we got to run. 0 to 10, 0 is it's kind of important, but I wouldn't have thought of it unless you asked me. And 10 is it's probably one of the top 3 things that I want to solve this year. Where is it? Oh, that's a 7. Okay. Hey, do you mind if I give you a call? And maybe in the next 48 hours, set it up with your assistant at a time that's appropriate for you. You can have a quick conversation. You'll find out in about 15 minutes whether we have anything that may be able to help you take care of this $50,000 problem. Sure. Fred, what's her first name? His or her first name? Oh, my assistant? Yes. Okay, that's Bill. Great. Would you? So Bill's not going to, I mean, he's not going to crush me through the meat grinder, right? Well, he may, he's really tough, you know, that guy's really tough. I said, okay. And so now that's it. That took me about 3 minutes. No one else, I didn't screw up, everyone else walking by. I qualified for what? A pain indicator, a hurt. I got an impact of what that meant to their company and an importance level. And I would do that on the back of every card. And you should be doing that at events. You should be doing that at networking meetings. When somebody says, gives you a card, flip it over. Top issue, how important is it, and what's it costing you? And those things will help make that event execution perfect. And I thought, I'm back to mindset again, Mike, before we go to post-event, which is, hey, listen, if you would just say, this could be my prospect, and I would say that no matter who walked up, because once I prejudge, I was in trouble. And I would always say, here it is. But I think you've got to adjust in the event. If your pain indicators are not working, if you have to adjust, find something else. Get with the team and say, hey, what are you saying that's resonating? Because my 3 pain indicators in my 30-second commercial, I'm bombing, or I'm 0 for 70 on getting an appointment for a cup of coffee. And adjust. I mean, don't do it after the fact. Do it in real time.
Yeah, and I love those tips there. And we had a couple of people ask these questions, so I'll just go ahead. In Asia, they don't like defacing the business cards, so you don't ever want to fold or write on one in Asia. Some people throw that tip out, and since we have people around the world, we want to do that. Also, I found that some people have like plastic business cards or crazy things these days. Where that doesn't work, you can just as easily snap a picture of it with your phone and take notes in Evernote or do whatever you have to do to make your notes in an electronic format these days as well. But I love it if you got a pen in your pocket and nothing else. That's really easy to have those.
Just write it on a piece of paper. I would say let's not get messed up on the detail here. The point is capture the information while they're in front of you. And here's why, Mike. The magic is when I call that person in a couple days, hey, listen, I know you met a lot of people at the show. You know, you and I talked about here is a challenge, and you said, hey, listen, that's costing me. Does that ring a bell? Now you stand out at the trade show. Otherwise, you can say, oh, remember me? I was next to the ice cream person and the free ruler person. Do you remember me? I'm the one who gave you that plastic bag. And they don't know who you are. I mean, we remember who we are because we feel we're important. They don't remember who we are. And so it's a great reminder and a great way to start your conversation after the trade show.
So let's talk about, the follow-up here, and it looks like our poll is really interesting on this one. If you want to chime in, you can text your answer code to 22333, or tweet at poll with your answer code. But it looks like everybody's at least getting leads to follow up with, which is great. But right now we're at a tie between 3 days or more or 1 week or more on the follow-up. Do you have a recommended time for follow-up, Dave?
Well, my thing was always you need to follow within 3 days or less. I think the longer you wait, two things happen. The less they remember about you, the harder it is to get past that gatekeeper, and more importantly, the more your world takes over. I mean, really think about it. And we have the population that's answering this, Mike, is not necessarily representative of the outside world, right? The outside world, I would bet you my paycheck that 75% of the population never calls one lead from a trade show. Not one lead. And we've all given our cards and never gotten a call, so we know that's true, right? I would do just a quick couple things on post-event. Is one, you should have a drip campaign. So drip them. You should, if you've collected cards, you go on LinkedIn and you get yourself connected. You see who you're connected with, mutual connections, and start that relationship. Separate yourself from the other exhibitors at that show.
And can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, not to interrupt, but we had a few questions about the drip, and people weren't familiar with that term. So before we talk about it, let's get a little more specific on that. Now, we can do that through an email marketing campaign, and that's where the term drip came from. We'll just drip information out to them following up the event. But you can also do that directly in a sales role with one person. So you could find an article on LinkedIn and send it directly to that person and say, hey, I thought you would find this interesting. Right?
I think it's taking relevant content, whether it's articles, videos, white papers, anything that you have found useful for creating credibility, separating yourself, edu-selling your customers where they get information at the same time, strengthens you, and then you drip, which means periodically you send them. And I just did this for one of our departments internally. We have a 6-week selling cycle, so we did 8 weeks out, and then we did 3 weeks after. So we extended it, but you really had to think about what would I send them and in which order would I send it to them and how am I going to get that done? And we dripped them, and our close rate for that particular group has gone through the roof. And is that the reason? I don't know. Who knows? But if you're going to believe statistics, I think it's a slight edge. I don't know what it is, but ultimately, I need to do whatever I can to separate myself from the competitive pack. That's what a drip is.
Yeah. And Andrew asked, do you want to be first or last to follow up? If you're first, you may get lost in the mix of other people following up, like within 24 hours, or if you wait too long, obviously they might have solved the problem. But I think what you're saying is a little bit of both, right? You want to get in there immediately and send a connection request on LinkedIn, but then continually drip them, follow up, and make sure that you are starting interesting conversations with them, right?
Well, I guess. I mean, look, immediately I would say that question's a little flawed. I mean, how do I know when last is? So am I taking a poll? You know, has anyone else reached out to Fred, the prospect, before I do? I think you need to play your game. And given the choice at a trade show, I think in every studies show when people go onto an internet site and people go onto a website, the hottest that they are is 30 minutes after the click. And if you just take basic logic, I would say err on the side of being first because, you know, the more you're engaged with me, the less likely you are to give up time to look at 3 other competitors of mine, especially if we've connected. I'm talking your language, I'm talking about your pain, then there's really no reason for them to shop. If they're going to shop, they're going to shop anyways. But I would like to be the high watermark. Hey, you better beat Sandler. Oh, you don't have this, you don't have that, versus me coming in trying to take away their preconceived ideas. And again, it's not that it can't be done. We do it all day long, but I'd like my first shot at you.
Good. And then what about the team here? We'll get back to our last bullet point on the slide, which is, and we also had it on the last slide too, at the event, you should probably call a halfway point timeout and say, hey, is what we're doing working? But you definitely want to do that after the event. Can you tell me about debriefing?
Yeah, sure. I think in general that you get back and you say, hey, what worked and what didn't work? And the reason why you do what works is because you want to repeat that. Most of us go right to what didn't work. And regardless of how you do that with the team, I like to self-reflect as well. So I would like to say, hey, did I have the energy throughout the show? Did I treat everybody as if they were my prospect and I just didn't know it? Did I do a great 30-second commercial? And then here are the other ones. Did I hit my goals? Did I have, what were my actual conversations? How many face-to-face meetings did I get? And I'm going to find there's one area that I tripped up on. There always is. If I didn't have enough face-to-faces, I'm going to say, why is that true? And then the other thing that I like to do, Mike, is I like to update my playbook. Now, what's a playbook? A playbook is where you store all your genius attacks, all your tactics and strategies for trade shows and events. And because as you do more and more in your sales career, you don't do trade shows as much as maybe you would like to. So you're going to forget some of the little nuances, some of the little extras. And so what I do is I capture the little things that really worked. So next trade show, which maybe is in 2 months from now, I open that up and say, oh yeah. And then I get to pick up where I left off in my learning and in my expertise versus sitting there in a 2-day trade show, remembering somewhere midway through day one saying, oh yeah, you know what? I should have brought this. I remembered that was a genius attack. And that's really what that playbook does. So I update my playbook and I get that done as well post. But the other thing is I do think you should make sure that you've contacted people and get that done after the fact. Whether you drip them, you follow them up, I mean call, but get it done quickly.
And we kind of slipped in the word post-sell appointments. What does that mean for everybody that's not a Sandler trainee here on the webinar?
Well, post-sale appointments, when I'm without meeting with you, you know, and you're walking through the show, I'd say, hey, look, I'm sure you're going to get called by 5,000 people here. So based on the fact that you said you had a closing issue, is that worth a 10-minute conversation? I mean, I don't want to chase you because I know you're going to get chased by thousands of people here. No, it's good. Just curiosity, what's the best day to reach you? And then that's how I'll do it. So I'll make sure that you don't, look, I don't want to get arrested for stalking, right? So is it something that we want to do? When somebody says yes, just say, okay, great, appreciate that. I always like to, if it's possible, have them actually set up the appointment right there. I mean, you have that ability now. Just get out the phones. If it's important enough, they say, yeah, call me at such and such a time. Then they've self-selected. You automatically know that they're ahead of somebody who says, no, just call me Tuesday, I'll take your call. I mean, will everyone pull out the phone? No, but they'll only do it if you ask, Mike.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we want to make sure that we get appointments and that they stick. And we have opened our last poll here, which is, what is your primary goal when attending an educational event or conference? Obviously, we have the Sandler Annual Sales and Leadership Summit coming up. You can text in or tweet in your answers here, and it looks like leads is still coming up there and qualifying prospects and stuff. But we see some other people, tips, networking, connections. I think, you know, connections are huge even at educational events and stuff. So that's great. What are your primary goals, Dave, when you attend an educational event?
Well, I've got buckets of goals. So the first bucket is, what do I want to go to that educational event and actually learn and take away from myself? And I think those you need goals as well, Mike, because otherwise you're just going to go and absorb and nothing really clicks. But the other side is, if you do have a goal, which I always have a second goal, which is, who else can I meet? And again, I'm back to the same thing. You should not be eating at an educational event with those people that you see every day. I mean, you can do that tomorrow. So you should look around for, who am I going to have breakfast with? Who can I have lunch with? Who can I have dinner with? Who can I meet for a coffee or a cocktail and kind of just chat? And that way, when I'm laser focused, that I have 3 slots that I would like to fill, preferably with 3 different people, unless I got an absolute whale on my hands, I would like to fill that up. So I think you have to have the goals with the educational seminars of, again, how many conversations, how many this, how many that. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have goals for your self-development goals. You should. But if you're going to go there to prospect and to find opportunities and to qualify, you need goals that reflect that, or it shall not happen.
That's awesome. So let's talk really quick about how to make the most of a conference or an event here. Obviously, we've talked already about the personal growth process that you got a growth process to do, that attending an educational event doesn't fix your sales behavior or whatever you're trying to learn at the event. And you also talked about attitude, behavior, and technique in the success triangle. So how do we make the most of our investment in this type of event?
Well, I mean, I think if you use those top three, and you've got them on the slide there, I would just right next to each one of them say, what are my top three goals? So what am I going to do from a behaviors? Like, what is my behavior there? Am I going to do what? And you should have behavioral goals. Your mindset, it's easy to fool yourself when you're at these events and to do those things. So make sure that your head's on straight, but also the technique. So what are some easy ones? I need an engagement question. I need to be able to flip the card and ask 3 good qualifying questions, however you do that, regardless of the cultural things. There's other ways to get that done. And how many meetings am I going to have? So that's on my technique side. But I think if you look at all 3 of those and really start to look at that on a 10 o'clock and then 12:30 and then 2 o'clock, and just break your day up and just keep that ahead of you and look at those goals, you're going to be a lot better off. I tell you where your attitude starts to stink. When you pre-qualify people based on some artificial criteria that you've come up with, and if you say this stinks and you're saying that at 11 o'clock, it's going to stink. I promise you, the longest 2 days of your life. And so you need to just switch how you're looking at that, because you're not going to survive that 2 days if you're going into that with that mindset. And if so, you need to level set that and just say, what happens if the exact opposite were true, that it wasn't a waste of my time, that my 2-year quota is going to be met by somebody walking through this event, I just don't know who they are yet. And it does change the way that you attack what you're doing.
Yeah, and I know your favorite technique, so last one really quick before we get to some Q&As and wrap up, but you love keeping a hot list. Can you tell people about the hot list?
Yeah, the hot list for me are lessons learned. So the hot list is the aha stuff that I would put into a playbook. What did I learn? And those who, I do a lot of fishing. I ask that every time, hey, what did we learn today? I ask that after every seminar, after lots of stuff. I'll say, hey, what did we learn today? And I capture that every single day at the end, and I put it on a hot list. Here are the things that I learned about either myself, or I learned how to become more effective in qualifying. Here's a better engagement question, because I'll listen to people in other booths, Mike. That's the advantage of being a salesperson. You can read upside down and you can hear conversations 2 booths away, right? And so I'll say, that was an awesome question, actually, and I'll put that on my hot list, which is for me to remember for next time so I don't have to reinvent the wheel.
That's awesome. So to wrap everything up here, once again, our Sandler Annual Sales and Leadership Summit is coming up on March 9th and 10th in Orlando, Florida. We would love to personally invite you to join us there. Make the trip to Orlando, network with 1,000 other like-minded professionals, and check out 2 days of just intensive rock'em sock'em content on sales, leadership, or enterprise selling. And you can find that at sandler.com/Sandler Summit. You can get registered today. And also, as another event, we know we have some strangers on here. I'll be hosting a special Social Selling Live virtual workshop. If you go to sandler.com/Social Selling Live, it's only $97, and you can attend a half day of our conference virtually and see what we're doing new with social selling in 2017. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that LinkedIn has changed their UI and some of the tools have moved or gone away, and it's causing you frustration, or maybe you didn't know that it's changing and you got a wake-up call coming when they flip your account here in the coming weeks. So we'd love to have you join us at that. And we have a lot of questions here, so I know we're at the top of the hour. Dave, anything else you want to add for everybody, or should we answer?
No, we can answer some questions, but and there's always a, hey, well, I like it. I will tell you this: if you decide to come to the summit, and for whatever reason you're unusual, and you say, hey, like, I didn't like it, just you walk right up to me, Mike, and I'll write you a check, whoever you are, if you decide to take a shot at the summit. But you will not be disappointed, and I'm happy to put my money where my mouth is. If you decide that you want to come visit us and you don't like it, well, definitely refund it for sure, but I don't think that's the case. We have an awful lot of people coming back 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So let's try to answer a quick Q&A, because I know we've been doing it throughout, but is there one that pops up that we can do quickly?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of them. So one interesting one is a trade show a sales event or a marketing event? How would you answer that question?
Well, I would say it's a sales event. Now, if you want to do marketing, then go into it with knowing that that's your goal, and try not to get confused. So if it's a marketing event, great. To me, sometimes people say it's a marketing event so they don't have to have any sales goals. If it is truly a sales goal, a sales event, then make it a sales event. If it's going to be truly a marketing event and that's what it is, then that's what your goal should be.
Awesome. And Barry had a good tip. He said at educational events, he likes to stand at the front door and welcome as many people as he can. And I think showing up early to any event is an awesome thing. That's when the people that plan the event are there. That's when the speakers get there early to check out the stage and everything. So showing up a few minutes early is an awesome tip we had in there.
What about this big ticket giveaway? I see this giveaway question.
That was Wendy's. I was going to ask you that one next. Do you need a big ticket giveaway to pull people into your booth? What do you think?
I don't think so, but that doesn't mean that if it works for you, keep doing it. But more importantly, when the people walk in to give you the card to do the giveaway, if you're not going to quickly qualify them, then you could give away a space shuttle and you're still not going to close any business. So I think the goal would be, if you are going to have a magnet and that draws people in for the giveaway, I'm okay with that, but use it effectively. Again, try to qualify them as quickly as possible. And we used to have a little contest in our booth. I could ask you those 3 qualifying questions, have a nice conversation with you within under 2 minutes, and I'd get all the information that I needed for me to have a great call on the back end. But to give away something just to collect calls, never to follow up on, is a waste of time.
Yeah, it gets a lot of false positives, right? Because people sign up just for the giveaway and they don't care anything about your product or service. And that also goes to the point of mailers. We had Lewis ask about mailers. How do you feel about materials and support marketing documents?
It's fine. I mean, listen, people are going to want to have that there, and it's a crutch for us, and you know, and a crutch is a tough word, but I think that if you have stuff there, great. Now, if I had stuff there on coaching, leadership, sales, and customer service, and you walked over the coaching, I should say to you, out of all the other ones, why coaching? What? So Romeo, why did you pick coaching? And then it's a great, I couldn't even help myself, Mike. And then it's a great conversation starter. So use it, why they took that one as a conversation starter versus just saying, oh, we had relevant information. I think everything that you do in a booth is a reason. There's a reason for everything that you do. If you have the flyers, ask why they took those flyers out of everything else. You're going to get a pain indicator. If you're going to do a giveaway, use it. Use it as part of your process. So I'm not against those. I mean, we bring them, but I'll use it as, again, to jumpstart a conversation.
Yeah, my personal rule is I make them ask me for it. So I'm not just shoving material in people's hands as they walk by. If they ask for material, then I'll give it to them. And how about
I have it behind me. I have the materials behind me, Mike, when I do them, because they're going to have to go get them versus, oh, I like that nifty 5-color brochure you have.
Okay, so here's an awesome one to end on from James. What's a nice way to politely end a conversation that's gone too long? I feel like he might be setting us up.
Well, I would always say simply, hey, listen, glad we had the opportunity to meet today. Look forward to following up shortly. Thanks for stopping by. That's all you have to do.
Yeah, my getaway phrase is, there anybody I can introduce you to, or anybody else in these other booths around here that you would like to meet?
I mean, listen, you've got people that go to trade shows to meet friends. I mean, that is true, right?
Yeah.
You know, but I'm not one of them, because that's not why I'm there. And so we'll quickly be very respectful, be very polite, and just say, hey, thanks for stopping by. And, you know, it is what it is. And there are so many people, when I say that, you can naturally transition to the next person. Hey, it's a pleasure to meet you. How are you? I'm Dave.
Yeah, that's awesome. Dave, I appreciate you spending the time with us, and everybody on the line today. I know we had hundreds of you there, and hopefully we got most of your questions answered. We'll follow up with the rest of them, and you can catch this recording in an email that'll follow up afterwards at this exact same link once it's done processing. And if you want to know more about Sandler or the Sandler Sales and Leadership Summit, go to sandler.com/Sandler Summit. And we had a lot of questions about the slideshows as well, so we'll get those up on SlideShare and share them on LinkedIn too if you want to have the notes from this session as well. So appreciate you guys for attending. Have a great day.